An entire legion vanishes without a trace. Kingdoms rise and fall in a single lifetime. This was the migration period, a storm of fire and movement that reshaped the world. From the ashes of the Roman Empire, new peoples emerged, but their stories are fragments, their histories written in riddles. We are left with more questions than answers. This journey uncovers 30 of the most baffling mysteries from this chaotic era, secrets that continue to challenge everything we think we know about the birth of modern Europe. You will discover the true stories hidden beneath centuries of myth and legend. How did a legendary king's treasure simply disappear? What force could darken the skies for over a year? The clues are scattered, waiting to be pieced together. What forgotten truth about our own past most captures your imagination? One of the most enduring enigmas left by Rome is the complete and silent disappearance of its 9th legion. Stationed in the damp, misty province of Britain, the Legio Nona Hispana was a formidable force, over 5,000 professional soldiers strong. Then, sometime after the year 120, it simply vanishes from all known records. No Roman historian chronicled its destruction. No victory monument was ever raised by a barbarian foe boasting of its defeat. It was just gone. The most popular theory suggests the legion was ambushed and wiped out in the unforgiving terrain of northern Britain, perhaps during a violent uprising among the local tribes. This idea paints a dramatic picture of disciplined Roman lines breaking against a chaotic, overwhelming force. A single unit erased from the empire's ledger in a single, catastrophic battle. Yet there is another possibility. Fragments of evidence, including a list of senior officers, hint that the 9th might have been transferred to the eastern frontiers of the empire, to the deserts of Judea or the mountains of Armenia, where it could have met its end in a forgotten campaign, its fate lost in the confusion of larger wars. The truth is, we have no physical evidence of its destruction anywhere. The silence is what makes this mystery so compelling. How does an entire legion, a cornerstone of imperial power, simply cease to exist without a single, definitive account of its final days? The answer remains one of Rome's greatest unsolved puzzles, a ghost story written not in words but in an absence. Out of the eastern steppes they came, a whirlwind of dust and terror that shattered the peace of the settled world. The Huns exploded into the European consciousness with such violence and speed that Roman historians could only describe them as a force of nature, a punishment from the gods. They seem to appear from nowhere, but their origins are one of the period's most heated mysteries. Who were these people and where did they come from? The most prominent theory links them to the Xiongnu, a powerful nomadic confederation that had menaced the Han dynasty in China centuries before. According to this idea, after their empire fragmented, a faction of the Xiongnu was pushed west, transforming over generations and vast distances into the Huns who challenged Rome. The evidence, however, is thin, resting on similarities in names and a shared nomadic lifestyle. Other scholars argue the Huns were never a single, unified people at all, but a rapidly assembled coalition of different steppe tribes, united under a charismatic leader and fueled by a common goal: plunder. This would explain their incredible diversity and the varied descriptions of their appearance. But what was the engine of their migration? Was it a simple chain reaction, one tribe pushing another, until the Huns were forced against the Roman frontier? Or was it a deliberate search for richer pastures and warmer climates, driven by a shift in the very climate itself? The mystery deepens when we realize they left no written records of their own. Their story was written by their terrified victims, leaving us with a portrait crafted from fear and legend. We are left to wonder, were they the architects of their own destiny, or merely the first and most violent domino to fall in a chain of events that would bring an empire to its knees? Their terrifying momentum did not end with the Huns. The shockwave of their arrival sent other peoples fleeing for their lives, setting in motion one of the most incredible journeys of the entire era. We follow the trail of the Vandals, a Germanic tribe whose name would become a synonym for wanton destruction, yet their true story is far more complex and mysterious. Their epic migration began in what is now Poland, a homeland they left behind for reasons we can only guess: pressure from incoming tribes, the search for better land, or simply the domino effect of the Hunnic advance could have spurred their exodus. They moved southwest, crossing the Rhine into Roman Gaul in a frozen winter, a desperate act that marked the beginning of their legend. But why did they keep moving? They did not settle in the rich provinces of Gaul or Spain for long. Instead, they made a decision that still baffles historians. In the year 429, under their king Genseric, the entire Vandal people, perhaps 80,000 strong, crossed the narrow strait at Gibraltar into North Africa. This was not a raid, it was a mass migration across the sea, an audacious gamble by a people with no naval tradition to speak of. What compelled them to risk everything on such a dangerous voyage? Were they pushed by stronger Germanic tribes like the Visigoths, or were they pulled by the legendary wealth of Roman Africa, the empire's breadbasket? Their success was as shocking as their journey. They carved out a powerful kingdom for themselves, ruling from the ancient city of Carthage and even sacking Rome itself in the year 455. But their kingdom was short-lived. Within a century, the Byzantine Empire reconquered North Africa, and the Vandals, as a distinct people, simply faded from history. They did not pack up and sail away. They were not exterminated. They just disappeared, absorbed into the local Roman and Berber populations. How does an entire culture, a people who crossed a continent and challenged an empire, vanish so completely? The mystery of the Vandals is not just their long road, but their silent end, leaving behind only their infamous name and the ghost of a kingdom on an alien shore. Buried within a grassy mound overlooking the River Deben, a ghost ship lay silent for over 13 centuries. The Sutton Hoo burial is not merely a grave, it is a monument to a world in flux. Discovered on the eve of the Second World War, this 90-foot-long ship had been dragged from the water, placed in a trench, and heaped with a king's ransom in treasure before being covered by earth, becoming a permanent part of the English landscape. The ship itself had rotted away, leaving only a perfect dark stain in the sand, a skeletal impression of a vessel built for the open sea, but who was deemed worthy of such a spectacular send-off. The most compelling candidate is King Redwald of East Anglia, a ruler mentioned in ancient chronicles who held power around the year 625. He was a king of two worlds, having converted to Christianity but later returning to the old pagan gods, a spiritual indecision that echoes throughout the burial site. The grave goods are a collection of breathtaking opulence and profound symbolic confusion. There was a magnificent helmet of iron and bronze, its face masked, creating the image of a fierce warrior with soaring eyebrows and a mustache that forms the wings of a bird of prey, a piece that has become an icon of the Dark Ages. Alongside it lay a suite of weapons, intricate gold jewelry, and a purse filled with 37 gold coins, each from a different mint in Francia, a demonstration of far-reaching political connections. Most telling, however, are the silver spoons inscribed with the names of the apostles Saul and Paul, a clear Christian symbol found beside the pagan ritual of burying a man with his ship to carry him to the afterlife. This was not a purely pagan king, nor a devout Christian one. The burial feels like a deliberate and perhaps anxious attempt to cover all spiritual bases. Was Redwald hedging his bets, ensuring a safe passage to the next life regardless of which god held the true power? Or was this a public declaration of a new, syncretic faith, a fusion of old and new beliefs crafted to unify a kingdom? The silent, ship-shaped hollow in the earth holds the answer, a mystery of identity and belief sealed forever beneath an English field. From the ghost ship of Sutton Hoo, we travel westward to the misty hills of Britain, where a different kind of legend took root. Here, the name of King Arthur echoes through 1,000 years of story, a beacon of hope in a land plunged into chaos. But behind the tales of a round table and a magical sword lies a historical black hole. Who was the man behind the myth? The earliest records are frustratingly brief. A Welsh monk named Gildas, writing in the 6th century, describes the Battle of Badon Hill, a major British victory against the Saxon invaders. Yet he never mentions Arthur by name. It is not until 2 centuries later, in a text known as the Historia Brittonum, that Arthur appears as a war leader credited with 12 great battles. These sources are not contemporary history, they are fragments of memory written down long after the events they describe. So, was Arthur a single, powerful warlord, a Romanized British general who rallied the crumbling legions and local tribes to hold back the tide for a generation? Perhaps he was a figure like the Roman commander Ambrosius Aurelianus, whom Gildas does name, his deeds later attributed to a more charismatic hero. Or maybe the name Arthur represents something else entirely, a composite character, a convenient label for the collective efforts of many different chieftains and warriors who fought for their homeland. This would explain why no single historical figure neatly fits the legend. The power of the Arthurian story, however, goes far beyond historical fact. In the centuries after the Romans left, as Saxon kingdoms solidified their control, the idea of Arthur became a potent symbol of British resistance and lost glory. He was the once and future king, a promise that a golden age could return and drive the invaders back into the sea. The legend was a tool for unity and a source of defiance, a story a people told themselves to remember who they were before the storm. The real mystery of Arthur is not just about finding a man in the historical record. It is about understanding why we need such heroes in the first place, and how the memory of one man or many could be forged into a myth strong enough to shape a nation's identity for a millennium. While the legend of Arthur gave hope, a far more tangible terror descended upon the world just decades later. The sun faded to a pale, blue-tinged disk in the sky, and a cold, unending gloom fell across the northern hemisphere. This was the year 536, the beginning of a climatic catastrophe so profound it was recorded with dread by chroniclers from Italy to China. For 18 months, a mysterious dust veil blanketed the atmosphere, casting a perpetual twilight and plunging summer temperatures into a deep, killing frost. The Byzantine historian Procopius wrote of a sun that gave no more light than the moon, and Irish monks noted that bread failed to grow for years. The cause of this global disaster is one of the period's most chilling scientific puzzles. For a long time, the prime suspect has been a cataclysmic volcanic eruption, perhaps from Iceland or Alaska, that hurled immense quantities of ash and sulfate aerosols high into the stratosphere, creating a planetary sunshade that crippled agriculture worldwide. Ice core samples from Greenland and Antarctica reveal a sharp spike in volcanic sulfates around this exact time, pointing to a truly colossal event. But some researchers point to another, more celestial possibility. Tree rings from that period show not only evidence of extreme cold, but also a sudden, mysterious spike in atmospheric dust, including microspherules that could suggest a comet or asteroid fragment exploding in our atmosphere, scattering a veil of fine particles. Could it have been a one-two punch, a volcanic eruption followed closely by a cosmic impact? The consequences were immediate and horrifying. Crops withered in the fields, leading to a famine of biblical proportions. The chronicles speak of people abandoning hope, of societies buckling under the strain. This was not just a bad year, it was a trigger. The Great Justinian Plague erupted across the weakened populations just a few years later, a pandemic that would kill millions. And on the move again were the people of the steppes, perhaps driven from their homelands by the same climatic shift. The dust veil of 536 did not just bring darkness, it may have been the final, environmental push that accelerated the great migrations, setting tribes on collision courses with empires. This mystery forces us to look beyond kings and battles to the very sky itself, and ask what unseen force could so decisively reshape human destiny. The same cold shadow that fell across the world in 536 may have been the final warning for another kingdom, one whose story would become so twisted with legend it is hard to find the truth. On the eastern frontiers of Roman Gaul, the Burgundians had carved out a homeland for themselves. They were not mere destroyers, they were a people seeking a place within the crumbling empire, even converting to Christianity and living as Roman allies for a time. Their kingdom, centered at Worms along the Rhine, seemed a successful fusion of Germanic and Roman worlds, a potential blueprint for the future. Then, in the year 436, disaster struck. Their world was shattered by the merciless armies of the Huns. The historical record is brutally brief, stating simply that the Hun king Attila's predecessors, in a ruthless campaign, utterly destroyed the Burgundian kingdom, killing their king and 20,000 of his people. This was not just a defeat, it was a near annihilation. How does a rising kingdom, seemingly secure in its alliance with Rome, fall so completely and so quickly? The Hunnic war machine was famously efficient, but the scale of the destruction suggests something more than a simple border raid. Was this a punishment for a failed alliance or a betrayal? Or was it simply the indiscriminate violence of a superpower clearing its periphery? The few survivors fled, resettling further west in Gaul under Roman protection, but their dream of an independent kingdom was broken. Their legacy, however, was just beginning. From the ashes of this historical catastrophe rose one of the greatest epic poems of the Germanic world, the Nibelungenlied. In its verses, the Burgundians are the central tragic figures, their court at Worms the stage for a story of heroic knights, a hoard of cursed gold, and a dragon slayer named Siegfried. The climax of the epic is a gruesome, blood-soaked massacre of the Burgundians in the hall of the Hun king Etzel, who is a literary stand-in for the historical Attila. This is where history and myth perform a haunting dance. The poem transforms a real historical massacre into a legendary one, preserving the memory of a national trauma within a framework of heroic destiny and betrayal. The Burgundians were not entirely gone, of course. Their name lived on in the region of Burgundy in France, and their remnant people were eventually absorbed by the rising power of the Franks. But their dramatic fall left a void, a mystery that history could not satisfyingly fill, so legend stepped in to do the job. The real fate of the Burgundians is a story of a people caught between two worlds, the Roman and the barbarian, only to be crushed by a third. Their silent history speaks through a thunderous epic, a reminder that sometimes the only way to understand a people's end is to listen to the song they left behind. Across the windswept bogs of northern Europe, another kind of ghost silently awaited discovery. These are the bog bodies, men, women, and children whose lives ended violently and were then offered to the wetlands, their bodies preserved for 2,000 years by the unique chemistry of the peat. They are not skeletons, but individuals with skin, hair, and facial expressions frozen in time, providing an intimate and chilling window into a world undergoing profound change. The mystery is not just how they were preserved, but why they were chosen for such a fate. The manner of their deaths is strikingly consistent and deeply ritualistic. Toland man, found in Denmark, had a serene expression, a leather noose still wrapped gently around his neck. Gråbøl man, also from Denmark, had his throat slit from ear to ear. Old Croghan man from Ireland shows evidence of a brutal stabbing and was then decapitated. These are not the random victims of battle or crime. The killings were deliberate, formal, and often involved multiple methods of execution, suggesting a powerful cultural tradition. So who were these people? The condition of their hands often provides a clue. Many, like Toland man, have well-manicured nails and show no signs of hard manual labor, hinting at a high social status. This has led to the compelling theory that they were nobles, kings, or even priests who were ritually sacrificed. In a time of crisis such as a failed harvest, a sudden famine, or the terrifying approach of a new enemy, these societies may have offered up their most valuable members to appease the gods and restore balance to the world. Their carefully prepared meals of porridge made from last season's grains, found in the stomachs of some victims, could represent a final, symbolic connection to the community and the land they were dying to save. But were they willing volunteers, embracing their fate for the good of all, or were they unwilling scapegoats punished for the community's misfortunes? The transition from the Iron Age into the migration period was a time of immense pressure as Roman influence waned and new tribal confederations formed. The bog bodies stand as stark, silent testimony to the extreme measures people will take when their world is turning upside down, when the old ways are challenged and the future is uncertain. What desperate prayer were these individuals meant to carry into the depths of the bog, and did the gods ever answer? Their journey began in a land of myth, a northern wilderness the Romans called Scanza. The Lombards emerge from these foggy origins as a people defined by their relentless movement. Their long migration from Scandinavia to the heart of Italy is a ghost trail on the map, a story pieced together from half-remembered legends and the sparse comments of Roman historians. Their very name, according to their own origin myth, came from a moment of divine cunning. Facing a seemingly impossible battle against a far more powerful foe, the story goes that their women tied their long hair in front of their faces, appearing as a fresh army of bearded warriors to their enemies. This trick, blessed by the god Woden, won them the day and the name Longobards, the long beards. This legend hints at a people who prized cleverness and survival above all else, traits that would define their enigmatic path. For centuries, they drifted south, a slow-moving current within the great river of migrating tribes. They settled for a time along the Elbe River, then moved again into the plains of Pannonia, modern-day Hungary. Here, they did something unusual. They lived for decades as nominal subjects of the Roman Empire and then of the Avars, a new wave of steppe warriors. This period of relative peace is a profound mystery. How did this fiercely independent people, known for their warrior culture, submit to foreign overlords for so long without being absorbed or destroyed? It suggests a pragmatic, almost patient strategy, a willingness to bide their time and gather strength in the shadow of greater powers. Then, in the year 568, their patience shattered. Seemingly without warning, the entire Lombard nation, over 100,000 men, women, and children, poured over the Alps into the sunny Italian peninsula. This was not a gradual infiltration. It was a sudden, violent invasion that carved the peninsula into a patchwork of duchies. What triggered this explosive final act? The Roman Empire in Italy was a hollow shell, exhausted by decades of war between the Byzantine Goths. The land was rich, fertile, and poorly defended, an irresistible prize. But the Lombards were not pushed by a new enemy from the east. They chose to move. Their king, Alboin, may have seen a perfect moment of weakness and seized it. Their invasion was so swift and effective that they established the last great Germanic kingdom on classical Roman soil, a kingdom that would give its name to the region of Lombardy. Yet their arrival was brutal, remembered by the Italians as a time of terror and destruction. The mystery of the Lombards is not just their long road, but their sudden, decisive turn from patient subjects to ruthless conquerors. What calculation, what whispered intelligence finally convinced them that the time for waiting was over and the time for taking had begun? Gold and jewels worth an emperor's ransom vanished into the hills of southern France. The Visigothic king Alaric entered Rome in the year 410, the first time the Eternal City had fallen to a foreign enemy in 8 centuries. His troops sacked the city for 3 days, but unlike common looters, they showed a strange reverence, sparing the city's great churches and carrying away treasures from the pagan temples and imperial palaces with systematic efficiency. Ancient sources whisper of a haul of staggering proportions, cartloads of gold and silver, including, perhaps, the sacred menorah from Jerusalem's temple, plundered centuries earlier by the Romans themselves. Alaric died just months after his greatest triumph, and his followers, seeking to honor him, diverted a river, buried their king and his legendary treasure in a secret grave, and then returned the water to its course, enslaving the prisoners who did the digging to keep the location forever secret. This is the foundation of the legend, a king and his hoard lost to a flowing river. For centuries, this story was just that, a myth. Then, in the 1850s, a rainstorm washed away the earth near the Spanish village of Guarazar, revealing a hidden cache of breathtaking votive crowns and crosses made of gold and inset with sapphires, emeralds, and pearls. These were not the spoils of Rome, but the sacred regalia of the Visigothic Christian kings who ruled Spain centuries after Alaric. The Guarazar treasure was a stunning confirmation that the Visigoths did possess and bury immense wealth. But it was only a fragment, a later religious hoard. The main prize, Alaric's original plunder from Rome, the golden heartbeat of the legend, has never been found. Its possible location has driven treasure hunters to obsession for generations. Some believe it lies near Cosenza in Italy, where Alaric died. Others argue his successors would have transported it to their strongholds in what is now southern France, hiding it in a cave, a lake, or another water-concealed grave. The sheer scale of the supposed hoard makes its complete disappearance baffling. Could such a concentration of historic wealth simply dissolve into the landscape without a single coin ever surfacing? The treasure is more than just gold. It is a physical link to the fall of Rome itself, a king's ransom that became a kingdom's ghost. The mystery endures because we know it must be out there somewhere, waiting for the right storm, the right turn of a shovel, to send its long-lost glitter back into the light. The greatest military machine the ancient world had ever known did not fall in a single, thunderous battle. Instead, the Western Roman army, the very institution that had forged an empire, simply dissolved. Its final century is a story not of heroic last stands, but of a slow, quiet unraveling that remains one of history's most profound puzzles. How could an army that had dominated the known world for half a millennium simply cease to function? The answer lies in a web of interconnected crises that choked the life from the legions. A catastrophic funding shortage was perhaps the most critical failure. The Roman state was perpetually bankrupt, its treasuries drained by endless civil wars, rampant corruption, and the sheer cost of defending vast frontiers. Soldiers' pay was often late or never came at all. Their equipment, once standardized and state-of-the-art, became a patchwork of personal gear and outdated hand-me-downs. Why would a soldier risk his life for an empire that could not even pay him? This financial rot bred a deeper, more insidious problem, the barbarization of the military. As the Roman citizenry grew increasingly unwilling to serve, the empire turned to the very peoples it had once fought, hiring Germanic tribesmen as foederati or allied troops. At first, these warriors were integrated into Roman units under Roman command. But over time, entire tribes were enlisted as cohesive blocks, loyal first and foremost to their own chieftains, men like Stilicho the Vandal or Ricimer the Suebian, who became the real power behind the crumbling imperial throne. The Roman army was no longer a tool of the Roman state. It was a collection of private, competing war bands wearing the ragged uniform of a dying idea. This led to the final, fatal stage, political fragmentation. Ambitious generals, whether of Roman or barbarian birth, constantly pulled legions from the frontiers to fight for the imperial purple in Italy, leaving the Rhine and Danube borders stripped bare. The provinces were left to fend for themselves. In Britain, the local aristocracy received a simple, stunning letter from the Emperor Honorius in the early 5th century, telling them to look to their own defense. And so they did, raising their own militias, which would slowly evolve into the armies of regional warlords. This is the core of the mystery. Was it a collapse or a transformation? Did the Roman army disappear, or did it simply change its skin? The disciplined legionary, with his short stabbing sword and rectangular shield, gradually gave way to the Germanic warrior with his long sword and round shield. The very soldiers who were supposed to defend the empire became the building blocks of the new kingdoms that replaced it. The army did not so much vanish as it was absorbed, its remnants flowing into the forces of the Franks, the Visigoths, and the Lombards. The end was not a bang, but a whisper, the slow, inexorable sound of an empire forgetting how to be an empire until one day there was no one left to answer the call. While the Western Roman army was dissolving into a patchwork of competing war bands, a different and far more numerous people were quietly emerging from the shadows of history. The Slavic peoples would eventually come to dominate a vast portion of Eastern Europe, yet their origins are one of the migration period's most profound and elusive puzzles. Unlike the Goths or the Vandals, whose great migrations were recorded, however imperfectly, by Roman historians, the early Slavs seem to appear almost out of nowhere in the historical record. So where did they come from? The search for a Slavic homeland has sparked a fierce and ongoing debate centered on two competing theories. The first is the allothonos or migrationist theory. This view places the original Slavic homeland in the marshy woodlands of the Pripyat Basin, in what is now Belarus and northern Ukraine. According to this idea, the Slavs were a relatively small and isolated people until the turbulent 5th and 6th centuries. The arrival of the Huns and the subsequent collapse of the Gothic kingdoms to their south, the theory suggests, removed the powerful neighbors who had once contained them. Suddenly presented with a power vacuum and vast, depopulated lands, the Slavs began an astonishingly rapid expansion, fanning out in all directions, eventually reaching the Elbe River in the west and the Balkans in the south. The evidence for this lies in archaeology, where a distinct material culture known as the Prague-Korczak complex appears and then spreads rapidly across Eastern Europe, a trail of pottery and simple settlements that seems to mark their path. The opposing view is the autochthonous theory. This argument posits that the Slavs were not newcomers but had always been there, indigenous to a much wider territory stretching from the Oder to the Dnieper rivers. Proponents of this view argue that the apparent sudden appearance of the Slavs is an illusion created by the nature of our sources. They suggest that earlier Greek and Roman writers like Tacitus did mention the early Slavs but grouped them under different, broader names like the Veneti. According to this perspective, the Slavic expansion was not a mass migration of people, but a cultural and linguistic diffusion, where a common Slavic identity gradually spread over a pre-existing related population. Why is their early history so ghostly? The answer lies in the very nature of their society. The early Slavs were not empire builders like the Romans, nor fearsome horse-borne conquerors like the Huns. They were, by most accounts, a people of farmers and forest dwellers, living in small, decentralized communities. They did not build great cities or raise towering monuments that would capture the attention of chroniclers. They left behind simple, sunken-floored huts and handmade pottery, not hoards of gold or grand burial ships. They were the quiet people living between the dramatic acts of more famous tribes. When the powerful Gothic and Hunnic kingdoms collapsed, it was these numerous, resilient, and adaptable people who slowly, steadily, and silently filled the space, their language and culture flowing into the valleys and plains left empty by war. Their mystery is not one of a dramatic arrival, but of a gradual awakening, a transformation from a collection of local tribes into the Slavic nations we know today. The question remains, did a people move, or did an idea slowly conquer a landscape? North of the Danube's mighty river, in the shadow of the Carpathian Mountains, lies a ghost kingdom. The Tervingi Goths, one of the most powerful Germanic confederations, built a formidable realm here in the lands known today as Romania and Ukraine. They were not just wandering barbarians, they were a settled people with kings, a complex society, and a deep connection to this territory. Then, in the late 4th century, the Hunnic storm broke upon them, shattering their world and sending them fleeing in desperation across the Roman frontier. The story of their flight is well documented, but the story of their homeland is not. The physical heart of their kingdom, their central places and royal sites, has vanished from the map, leaving behind one of archaeology's most frustrating quests. Where was the seat of their power? Historians have a name for it, Gutheuda, the land of the Goths, mentioned in ancient texts, but turning that name into a place on the ground has proven nearly impossible. The challenge is that the Tervingi did not build in stone. They built with wood and earth, materials that decay and leave only faint traces in the soil, subtle discolorations and postholes that are easily missed or misinterpreted. A grand royal hall for the Tervingi would not have been a Roman palace, but a large, timber-framed longhouse, its outline now just a ghostly rectangle of darker earth. How do you find a capital city when its greatest buildings have simply melted back into the landscape? Some clues have emerged from the rich, black soil of Ukraine. Vast settlements known as the Santana de Murs Chernyakov culture stretch across the region, characterized by their distinctive pottery and mixed Germanic and Sarmatian burials. This is almost certainly the archaeological footprint of the Gothic world, a cultural zone that included the Tervingi. But within this sprawling network of villages and farmsteads, where was the center? Was their power dispersed, held together by loyalty to a king who moved his court from one great estate to another? Or was there a single, preeminent place, a Gutheuda that all Goths would have recognized as their heart? The mystery deepens when we consider their political organization. They were led by a judge, a kind of king-priest, yet they also had councils of elders. Were they a unified monarchy or a loose confederation of clans, held together only by the immediate threat of Rome and then the Huns? The answer lies buried in those faint soil stains, waiting for the one discovery, the one royal grave or ceremonial site that could finally give a lost kingdom its name and its place in history. Far to the north, beyond the last Roman wall, a different kind of ghost story is carved in stone. The Picts were a fierce confederation of tribes that held sway over much of what is now Scotland, a people so named by the Romans for their custom of painting or tattooing their bodies. They were the masters of their rugged landscape, successfully resisting Roman conquest and later holding off the Angles and the Scots, yet they left behind almost no written records of their own. Their history, their thoughts, their very voice is locked away in a breathtaking gallery of over 250 massive, intricately carved standing stones. These are not simple markers, they are canvases of polished rock covered in a vivid and mysterious vocabulary of symbols. You will find a bestiary of strange creatures, from swimming seals and swooping eagles to a terrifying beast known simply as the Pictish beast, a swimming animal with a pointed snout and curling body that looks like no creature on earth. Alongside these animals are everyday objects, mirrors and combs, and an array of abstract shapes, from double discs and Z-rods to crescent and V-rod patterns. The arrangement is not random. The symbols often appear in pairs or small groups, a consistent syntax that strongly suggests they are conveying specific information. But what information? The central enigma is profound. Are we looking at a written language? If so, it is a script unlike any other, a non-alphabetic system that has stubbornly resisted all attempts at a Rosetta Stone-style translation. Some linguists believe the symbols are logograms, where each picture represents a single word or concept, perhaps the name of a person or a place. This theory turns each stone into a kind of royal proclamation or a territorial claim, a message carved in stone for all to see. Another compelling idea is that the symbols functioned as a sophisticated system of heraldry. The repeated combinations could denote lineages, alliances, or social status, a visual language of identity and power understood by every Pict from king to commoner. A mirror and comb, for instance, might symbolize a woman of high rank, while a specific animal could represent a particular royal dynasty. Why has this code proven so unbreakable? The greatest obstacle is the complete absence of a bilingual text. We have no Pictish equivalent of the Rosetta Stone, no inscription that pairs these enigmatic symbols with a language we already understand, like Latin or Old Irish. The Picts themselves eventually faded from history, merging with the Gaelic-speaking Scots of Dalriata to form the Kingdom of Alba, the precursor to medieval Scotland. In doing so, their unique language and culture were absorbed and lost. The stones stand as their last great monument, a library of knowledge carved in a language we can see but cannot read. They are the silent chronicle of a people who defined their world through symbols, a proud history waiting just beyond our understanding. What stories of kings and battles, of treaties and myths are held forever in their stony silence? A single blood-soaked day in the year 451 has been remembered as the battle that saved the West. On the Catalonian plains, a coalition of Romans and Visigoths, led by the stalwart general Flavius Aetius, stood against the seemingly unstoppable tide of Attila the Hun. The clash was monumental, a grinding, chaotic melee of cavalry charges and infantry lines described in vivid, terrifying detail by the chroniclers. Yet, the more we look at this legendary confrontation, the more its solid facts begin to blur into a fog of heroic myth. The first great mystery is the very ground on which it was fought. Where exactly are the Catalonian plains? The name points to the region around Chalons in modern France, but some historians argue forcefully for a location nearer to Troyes, 100 miles to the east. This is not merely an academic quibble over geography. The true location would tell us about the strategic intentions of both armies, revealing whether Attila was caught on the march or if he had chosen his own field for a final, decisive showdown. The battle itself is portrayed in the sources as a titanic, world-altering event, a last stand of Roman order against barbarian chaos. The Visigothic king Theodoric was killed in the fray, and Attila, facing utter defeat, was said to have prepared a funeral pyre of saddles, ready to burn himself alive rather than be captured. But did this dramatic scene ever happen? The story comes from only one source, the Gothic historian Jordanes, writing a century later. His account is filled with the stuff of epic poetry, designed to glorify his own people, the Goths, as the saviors of civilization. So, what really happened when the two armies collided? It is likely the battle was less a clear-cut Roman victory and more a brutally indecisive bloodbath. Attila was checked and forced to retreat, but his army was not annihilated. The Roman-Visigothic alliance, fragile at best, fractured almost immediately after the last sword was swung. Aetius, the Roman general, persuaded his Visigothic allies not to pursue and finish off the Hunnic army, a decision that has baffled historians ever since. Was he simply being pragmatic, preserving a weakened Attila as a counterbalance to his own powerful and potentially rebellious allies? The battle's ultimate significance is the final piece of the puzzle. Was it truly the salvation of Gaul and Western Christendom? Or was it just one more destructive encounter in the long, painful collapse of Roman power, a battle that merely redirected the Huns toward Italy for another round of plunder? The legend of the Catalonian plains grew because the world needed a story of a last successful stand. The reality was far murkier, a messy, ambiguous conflict that stopped a raid but failed to save an empire. Its true story still buried somewhere beneath the quiet fields of northeastern France. The story of England's birth has been told for centuries as an invasion. Waves of Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, so the tale goes, sailed across the North Sea in the 5th and 6th centuries, landing on the shores of a post-Roman Britain and sweeping the native Celtic Britons aside in a storm of fire and sword. This was the Adventus Saxonum, the coming of the Saxons, an event that painted the map with new kingdoms and a new language, seemingly erasing the old world. But this clean, dramatic narrative is now cracking under the weight of new evidence, leaving us with a far more intriguing and complex mystery. Was it really a violent, large-scale replacement of people, or was it something else entirely? The traditional view, drawn from bleak medieval chronicles like that of the monk guilders, describes cities falling into ruin and the native population being slaughtered or driven into the wild corners of Wales and Cornwall. It is a story of conquest, clear and simple, yet archaeology has long struggled to find evidence of such widespread destruction. There are very few burned cities or mass graves from this period. Instead, the change in material culture is profound but subtle. The Roman-style villas are abandoned and a new type of handmade pottery appears alongside Germanic-style jewelry and the building of timber halls. For generations, this was interpreted as proof of the invaders' arrival, the physical footprint of a new people. But what if these changes in fashion and architecture tell a different story? What if this was not a sign of population replacement, but of cultural assimilation, a process where the native Britons began to adopt the customs, language, and identities of a new, dominant elite? This is where the mystery deepens and where modern science enters the fray. Recent studies of ancient DNA are completely rewriting this foundational story. Genetic evidence from skeletons buried in early Anglo-Saxon cemeteries reveals a stunning secret. Many of these individuals, laid to rest with classic Germanic grave goods, were not genetically Germanic at all. They were, in fact, predominantly of native British Celtic ancestry. This single finding turns the entire traditional narrative on its head. It suggests that the line between invader and native was incredibly blurry. The people living in so-called Anglo-Saxon England were not a new population that had pushed the old one out. They were largely the same people who had over a few generations simply stopped living as Romans or Britons and started living as Saxons. So how did this happen? The process was likely one of elite takeover and cultural change, not genocide. A relatively small number of warrior elites from the continent may have seized power, perhaps hired as mercenaries to begin with, as the legend of Vortigern and Hengist suggests. These new rulers established themselves at the top of society, and their culture, their language, and their customs became the markers of status and power. To get ahead, to be part of the new ruling class, the native British aristocracy would have had to adopt Anglo-Saxon ways, speaking their language, wearing their jewelry, and burying their dead in the new fashion. Over time, this new identity trickled down through society, until eventually everyone in the lowlands of Britain thought of themselves as Anglo-Saxon. The old British language and Celtic identity were marginalized, surviving only on the western fringes. The mystery of the Anglo-Saxon Adventus, then, is not one of a great battle, but of a quiet, profound transformation. It forces us to ask what really makes an ethnic identity. Is it blood and ancestry, or is it language, culture, and the stories we tell about ourselves? The answer seems to be that a people can change their skin without a massive migration, that the birth of England was less a violent death and more a slow, collective reinvention, its true origins hidden for centuries within the very bones of its first people. Even as the old Roman world dissolved into new kingdoms, one small pocket of the empire refused to die. In the fertile lands of northern Gaul, surrounded by Frankish and Visigothic territories, the domain of Soissons endured. This was not a barbarian kingdom, but a rump Roman state, a fragment of the Western Empire that continued to function a full decade after the last emperor had been deposed in Italy. Its administration was Roman, its army was organized in the Roman style, and its people saw themselves as Roman citizens. For a time, it was a living anachronism, a ghost of the old world haunting the new. The man who ruled this island of Romanitas was a man named Syagrius. History remembers him as a king, but he likely bore the title of Dux, a Roman military governor. He was the son of Aegidius, a powerful Roman general who had effectively gone rogue in Gaul, carving out his own domain as the central government in Italy crumbled. Syagrius inherited this legacy, ruling from the city of Noviogenum, which we know today as Soissons. For 20 years, he held the line, maintaining Roman law and order in a small corner of a province that had otherwise slipped into chaos. Then came Clovis, the young and ruthlessly ambitious king of the Salian Franks. In the year 486, Clovis marched his army against Syagrius. The two forces met in a battle that was, in hindsight, a collision of two futures. On one side was the last Roman, upholding a fading tradition. On the other was the first king of what would become France, a symbol of the new order. Syagrius was defeated. The battle itself is one of the great silences of the era. We do not know where it was fought, the size of the armies, or the tactics that decided the day. All we know is that Syagrius fled, seeking refuge with the Visigothic king Alaric Roman II in Toulouse. In a move that reveals the shifting political landscape, Alaric, not wanting to provoke the rising power of the Franks, handed Syagrius back to Clovis, who promptly had him executed. The domain of Soissons was absorbed into the Frankish kingdom, and the last flicker of direct Roman rule in the west was extinguished. The profound mystery surrounding Syagrius is why we know so little about him or his state. He was the last Roman ruler in Gaul, a man who represented a direct link to the classical world, and yet he is a ghost in his own story. No contemporary chronicle from his own court survives, if it ever existed. Our main source, the Frankish historian Gregory of Tours, wrote a century later and gave him the title King of the Romans, a label that may have been more poetic than precise. Why did his story, so symbolically potent, fail to be preserved? The likely answer is as pragmatic as it is sad. His story did not serve the new powers that were writing history. For the victorious Franks, Syagrius was a defeated rival, a footnote in the glorious rise of Clovis. For the remaining Roman aristocracy in Gaul, who were busy making peace and marrying into the new Frankish elite, celebrating a failed rebel like Syagrius was politically unwise. His memory was inconvenient, and so it was allowed to fade. The lost kingdom of Soissons stands as a final, poignant question. What was life really like in this last outpost of empire? Was it a brave attempt to keep the light of civilization burning, or was it merely the private fiefdom of a warlord, using the faded banner of Rome to legitimize his own power? The truth died with Syagrius, leaving behind only the name of a city and the echo of a world that vanished not with a bang but with a whisper. They rose from the shadow of giants only to vanish just as quickly. The Gepids are one of the great also-rans of the migration period, a Germanic people whose entire history is a haunting cycle of subjugation and fleeting triumph. Their very origins are wrapped in myth, with their name said to mean the slow or the laggards, a story claiming they were the last to arrive in the migration from the legendary homeland of Skansa. This tale of being perpetually one step behind set the stage for their entire existence. For centuries, they lived in the long shadow of their more powerful cousins, the Ostrogoths, and later they were ground under the heel of the Huns, serving as loyal foot soldiers in Attila's vast army. They fought on the losing side at the Catalonian plains, their fate tied to a falling star, but Attila's death in 453 was their moment of deliverance. At the Battle of Nedao, the Gepids led a coalition of subject peoples in a massive rebellion against their Hunnic overlords. In a furious clash of spears and swords, they shattered the Hunnic Empire, carving out a kingdom for themselves from its corpse in the rich Carpathian basin, the heart of modern-day Hungary. For a single glorious century, they were a power to be reckoned with, controlling the vital Danube plain. Their king was a recognized ally of the Byzantine emperor in Constantinople, and their capital at Sirmium was a prized Roman city. Yet this golden age was built on fragile ground. How did a people who had achieved such a stunning reversal of fortune fail to secure a lasting legacy? The answer lies in the very geography of their success. Their kingdom sat at the crossroads of Europe, a fertile and strategically vital plain that made them a target for every new wave of migrants. They found themselves caught in a vice between two rising powers, the Lombards to the west and the Avars, a new and terrifying steppe confederation pressing from the east. The end came with brutal swiftness. In the mid-6th century, the Lombards, seeking a new homeland, smashed into the Gepid kingdom. In a desperate bid for survival, the Gepid queen, Rosamund, even agreed to marry the Lombard king Alboin, a union born not of love but of political necessity. The peace did not hold. The final blow was a coordinated pincer movement. Around 567, the Lombards and the Avars, in a cynical pact, attacked the Gepids from both sides. Their kingdom was utterly erased from the map, its people scattered, killed, or enslaved. The Lombards, satisfied with the destruction of their old rivals, then moved on, pouring into Italy and leaving the Carpathian Basin to the Avars. The Gepids did not pack up and leave, they simply ceased to be a coherent people. Some were absorbed into the Avar horde, others into the Lombard kingdom, their identity dissolving within a generation. Their mystery is one of tragic timing, a story of a people who finally seized their destiny, only to discover they were standing in the path of an oncoming storm. What legacy did they leave behind? Almost nothing but their name, a whisper in the chronicles of their enemies, a reminder that in the chaos of the migrations, even a kingdom could be a fleeting thing. Standing stones in their thousands march across the Breton landscape, a silent army frozen in time. The Karnak alignments are a mystery built thousands of years before the first Roman soldier ever set foot in Gaul, yet their story did not end in the deep past. As the migration period unfolded, as Saxon pirates raided the coasts and Frankish kings consolidated their power inland, these ancient rows of granite continued to watch over a changing world. What purpose could these prehistoric monuments possibly hold for the Celtic people of Armorica, the region we now call Brittany, who are caught between these new pressures? They were not forgotten relics. The sheer scale of the site, with nearly 3,000 menhirs arranged in precise, parallel rows, suggests it remained a place of profound cultural importance. In a time when the old Roman order was crumbling and new, foreign kingdoms were rising, the alignments would have served as a powerful anchor to a deeper, more indigenous past. For the Britons who had fled across the Channel to escape the Anglo-Saxon advance, this landscape was a physical claim to their ancestral identity, a stone-built declaration that they were here first. The mystery is not why they were built, but why they were still so fiercely relevant. One compelling theory is that they functioned as a grand ceremonial space for a society under threat. Facing the existential pressures of migration and conquest, the community would have gathered among the stones to reaffirm their unity, to perform rituals that connected them to their gods and their ancestors, reinforcing a shared Celtic identity distinct from their Frankish and Saxon neighbors. Were they the stage for coronations of local chieftains, or for great seasonal festivals that tied the people to the land they were determined to hold? Another, more pragmatic idea suggests the alignments held a function that was desperately needed in a violent age, that of a designated neutral ground. In a world fracturing into petty kingdoms and rival warlords, this awe-inspiring sacred space may have been one of the few places where different groups could meet under a temporary truce. Here, they could negotiate treaties, settle disputes, and arrange marriages without immediate fear of betrayal, all under the watchful eyes of the gods and the timeless stones. The alignments were more than a calendar or a temple. They were a sanctuary and a symbol of permanence. Their continued use is a testament to the human need for stability when the world is falling apart. As new cultures swept across Europe, the people of Brittany held fast to the oldest things they knew, finding strength and solace in a forest of stone planted by their deepest ancestors. What secret gatherings, what desperate prayers did those ancient stones witness as darkness closed in on the old world? Their story begins on the windswept shores of the Baltic Sea, in a homeland they called Rugeland. The Rugii were a people of the Eastern Germanic world, neighbors to the more famous Goths, carving out an existence on the coast of what is now Poland. For centuries, they were a local power, but the tremors of the migration period would soon pull them into a much larger and more dangerous game. When the Hunnic storm broke, the Rugii, like so many others, were swept up in its fury. Some were forced into Attila's vast confederation, while others sought refuge, moving south and west to escape the chaos. They eventually found a new home along the upper Danube, in the Roman province of Noricum, a land of rolling hills and alpine passes that corresponds to modern Austria. Here, they did something remarkable. They did not just raid or plunder, they built a kingdom. In the power vacuum left by the vanished Roman administration, the Rugii established themselves as the new rulers of Noricum, with their king, Falethius, holding court from the stronghold of Fabianes. Their kingdom was a strange hybrid, a Germanic power ruling over a largely Roman population, and for a brief moment, it seemed they might forge a lasting state from the empire's wreckage. Then came Odoacer, this Germanic general who would soon become the king of Italy after deposing the last Western Roman emperor, saw the Rugian kingdom as a threat on his northern flank. In the year 487, he marched his army into Noricum, defeated Falethius in battle, and captured the Rugian king and his queen, Juisa. Odoacer had them executed, and with that single, decisive act, the Rugian kingdom collapsed. But this is where the true mystery begins. What happened to the Rugii people after their king was gone? They did not simply vanish from the map overnight. Some were undoubtedly absorbed into Odoacer's own multi-ethnic army. Others may have remained in Noricum, their distinct identity slowly eroding as they intermarried with the local Roman populace and other incoming Germanic groups like the Lombards. Yet the silence that follows their defeat is profound. Within a generation or two, the Rugii ceased to be mentioned as a distinct people in any chronicle. They left no lasting kingdom that bore their name, no region that remembers them. How does an entire tribe, one significant enough to found a kingdom in the heart of a former Roman province, disappear so completely from the historical record? Their fate is a stark lesson in the fragility of identity during this era. Without a king, without an army, and without a territory to call their own, a people could simply dissolve, their name fading from memory as they were assimilated into the new societies rising around them. The Rugii are a ghost people, their story a reminder that not every kingdom that fell during the Great Migrations left a visible scar on the land. Some vanished as quietly as a footprint in the rain. Centuries before, the civilized world of the Bronze Age Mediterranean had crumbled under the attacks of mysterious fleets known only as the Sea Peoples. Now, a similar terror rose from the northern waters. The coasts of Britain and Gaul were plunged into a new dark age by wave after wave of seaborne raiders. But who were these pirates of the north, and what force propelled them from their homelands? The Saxon, Anglo, and Jutish war bands that struck with such ferocity present a puzzle that echoes the ancient mystery of the Sea Peoples. Were they simply opportunistic looters, or were they the desperate vanguard of a people on the move? One powerful explanation points to the land itself. Their homes in what is now Denmark and northern Germany were a patchwork of sandy soil and coastal marshes, land that could only support a limited population. As families grew and generations passed, the pressure on these limited resources would have become immense. A bad harvest, a harsh winter, or a slow creep of the sea could tip the balance from survival into catastrophe. The sea, then, was not a barrier but a highway, offering a solution to the crisis of overpopulation. But was it only a lack of food that drove them? Another clue lies in the political landscape they left behind. Roman power had once projected a formidable presence along the Rhine frontier, a force that could both punish and employ ambitious warriors. With that power now hollowed out, the old deterrent was gone. The rich, undefended villas of post-Roman Britain and the trading ports of Gaul were like a beacon, offering wealth that was simply there for the taking. This was not just a migration of the hungry, it was a calculated risk by the ambitious. The legendary English monk Bede, writing centuries later, described the arrival of the first Angles in Britain as an invitation, a story of mercenaries hired by a British king named Vortigern to protect him from his enemies, who then turned on their employer. This tale, whether true or not, captures the complex reality. Some came to serve, some to settle, and others only to plunder and sail away. The mystery deepens when we consider the sheer scale and coordination of their movements. This was not a handful of rogue ships, but a sustained, organized exodus that eventually led to the permanent settlement of entire regions. The Angles gave their name to East Anglia, the Saxons to Sussex and Essex, and the Jutes to Kent. They were not just raiders, they were colonists. So what was the final push? Could a changing climate have played its part? A slow shift in weather patterns that made their northern homelands less habitable, pushing them toward the milder, more fertile lands of the former empire. The truth likely lies in a toxic cocktail of all these factors. Overpopulation created the pressure, political collapse provided the opportunity, and a warrior culture glorified the solution. They were the sea peoples of their age, a storm of desperate and ambitious humanity that washed away the old map of Britain and drew a new one in its place, leaving us to wonder if history's greatest upheavals always arrive from the sea. In a small town in Roman Spain, a bishop named Hydatius dedicated his life to recording the slow death of his world. His chronicle was meant to be a meticulous year-by-year account of the 5th century, a vital eyewitness to the final collapse of Roman authority in the province of Hispania. He documented the endless civil wars, the arrival of the Suebi and the Visigoths, the famines and the plagues, watching as the intricate machinery of empire rusted into silence. His work is one of our most precious windows into that terrifying time, a desperate attempt to make sense of the chaos. And then, just as the story reaches its climax, the manuscript breaks off. The final entry is for the year 468. After that, there is only a void. The abrupt end of Hydatius's chronicle is a historical tragedy in itself. Did the aging bishop die, his pen falling from his hand mid-sentence? Was his scriptorium destroyed by raiders, the rest of his pages burned or scattered? Or did the despair simply become too much for him, the relentless tide of bad news finally extinguishing his will to record it? We will never know. The gaps in his manuscript are like missing pieces from a mosaic of the apocalypse. We are left to wonder what crucial events he witnessed in those lost final years. Did he describe the final consolidation of the Visigothic kingdom in Spain? Did he record the last pathetic appeal from a Roman emperor who no longer had any legions to send? His silence is deafening. The importance of his lost chronicle cannot be overstated. For historians, it is the black hole at the center of our understanding of Hispania's transformation. We have the archaeological record, the coin hoards buried in panic and never recovered, the villas abandoned to fire and weed. But we lack the narrative, the human voice that could tell us how it felt to live through the final act. Hydatius gave us the prologue and the middle chapters, but he was snatched away before he could write the ending. His incomplete work is a perfect metaphor for the era itself, a story that trails off into silence, leaving us to forever wonder what final words the last Roman of Spain never got to write. Even as kingdoms rose from the ashes of Rome, the coins in their treasuries told a strange and contradictory story. Across the former Western Empire, from the mints of Ostrogothic Italy to the workshops of Frankish Gaul, new Germanic kings were producing currency that bore the portraits and names of long-dead Roman emperors. They struck these coins not in their own image, but in the likeness of men like Anastasius and Zeno, emperors who ruled from the distant, glittering capital of Constantinople. This was the era of pseudo-imperial coinage, a monetary mystery that reveals a deep psychological truth about the end of the ancient world. Why would a powerful, independent ruler like Theodoric the Great, who controlled Italy with absolute authority, refuse to put his own face on his money? The answer is a masterclass in political theater. For Theodoric and his contemporaries, Roman legitimacy was the ultimate source of authority. By minting coins in the name of the current Eastern emperor, Theodoric was performing a delicate dance. He was presenting himself not as a foreign conqueror who had overthrown Roman rule, but as a loyal subordinate, a viceroy legally governing Italy on behalf of the empire. This careful fiction allowed him to rule his Roman subjects without provoking a devastating war with Constantinople. It was a signal to everyone, from the senatorial aristocracy in Rome to the farmers in the countryside, that the existing order, the reassuring framework of Roman law and administration, was still intact. The coins were a promise of stability, but the deception runs even deeper. Archaeologists have found that some of these coins, while bearing the name of a recognized emperor, were struck from noticeably debased metal, with less silver or gold than their official counterparts. This suggests a more cynical, practical motive. A coin with the face of a familiar emperor was more readily accepted in trade across the Mediterranean, giving these new kingdoms access to a vast economic network. It was a financial shortcut, a way to fund their states without having to establish the credibility of a brand new currency from scratch. So were these kings humble servants of a faded ideal or cunning manipulators of a powerful brand. The coins themselves are the evidence of a profound transition. They represent the moment when barbarian rulers realized it was far easier to wear the mask of Rome than to erase its memory. The pseudo-imperial coinage was the final, brilliant lie of the dying empire, a fiction that everyone agreed to believe because the truth that the world they knew was truly gone was simply too terrifying to accept. Their ferocity was legendary, a people who seemed to thrive on chaos itself. The Heruli emerged from the shadowy fringes of Scandinavia as one of the most feared and unstable forces of the entire migration period. They were pirates of the land and sea, masters of lightning raids and sudden betrayals, their name a byword for brutality. Their story is not one of building a lasting kingdom, but of a relentless, dizzying journey across the map of Europe, a journey that ends in one of the era's most puzzling disappearances. From their probable homeland in southern Scandinavia, they erupted onto the historical stage, first as raiders along the Roman frontier, then as key players in the destruction of the mighty Ostrogothic kingdom on the Black Sea. They fought as mercenaries for anyone who would pay and as enemies to anyone who stood in their path. Their mobility was astounding, striking from the Danube to the Aegean Sea with terrifying speed. They were the ultimate opportunists in an age of opportunists, a tribe without a fixed home, living by the sword and for the plunder, but this constant motion came at a cost. Their society was starkly divided between a warrior elite and a servile underclass, and their political structure was notoriously volatile, with kings being raised up and cast down with bloody regularity. This internal instability makes their ultimate fate so difficult to unravel. After suffering a catastrophic defeat around the year 512, the Heruli fragmented. One large group sought refuge within the safety of the Eastern Roman Empire, settling in the Balkans as foederati, imperial allies. They fade from prominence there, slowly absorbed into the Roman military machine. But another faction, according to the chronicler Procopius, made a decision that still baffles historians. Defeated and disgraced, they chose to undertake an impossible journey. They decided to go home. This band of Heruli supposedly turned their backs on the Roman world and marched north beyond the Danube, through a wilderness of hostile tribes, in a desperate attempt to find their mythical Scandinavian homeland, a place their people had left generations earlier. Did they actually complete this epic, backward migration? Did they truly find their way back to that fog-shrouded north? Procopius insists they did, reporting that they settled near a tribe called the Goti. If true, it is a story without parallel, a people reversing the tide of the Great Migrations, but no archaeological evidence has ever confirmed their return. The other possibility is that the remnants of the Heruli who stayed in Central Europe were finally swallowed up by their old allies, the Lombards, just before the Lombards' own great invasion of Italy. Their fierce identity, once so potent, simply dissolved within the larger tribe. So, did they vanish into the Lombard ranks, or did they achieve the impossible and return to the legends of the north? The enigma of the Heruli is the mystery of a people who lived by movement, leaving us to wonder if their final, greatest journey was one of historical fact, or merely a desperate legend they carried with them into the silence. A single hilltop victory halted the storm for 50 years. The Battle of Mount Badon stands as the great turning point in the story of post-Roman Britain, a legendary triumph where the native Britons finally stemmed the relentless tide of the Saxon advance. The chronicles claim this victory secured a full generation of peace, a golden respite from the constant warfare that had defined the age. Yet the battle itself is a phantom, its details obscured by the very myths it inspired. The first and greatest question is whether it happened at all. Our earliest source, the British monk Gilders, writing only decades after the event, confirms a great victory at Badon Hill. He calls it the last great slaughter of the Saxons, a siege that brought a temporary end to the horrors he so vividly lamented. But in a silence that has fueled centuries of debate, Gilders never names the British commander. He gives the credit not to a king named Arthur, but to Ambrosius Aurelianus, a Romanized British nobleman. The connection to Arthur does not appear until centuries later in the Historia Brittonum, a text that explicitly names Arthur as the hero who carried the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ for 3 days and 3 nights on his shoulders at the Battle of Badon. This single sentence launched 1,000 legends, but is it history, or is it the echo of a folk memory? A name later attached to a victory that had lost its general. If the battle was real, where was it fought? The name Mount Badon suggests a hill fort, and the landscape of Britain is dotted with possible candidates. Some argue for Badbury Hill in Dorset, a place with ancient fortifications and a strategic position. Others champion Liddington Castle in Wiltshire, which overlooks the ancient Ridgeway tract. There is even a compelling case for a site near the city of Bath, whose Roman name was Aquae Sulis, a location of immense strategic importance. Each theory paints a different picture of the conflict. Was it a desperate defense of a fortified hill, with British warriors rolling stones down upon the Saxon attackers? Or was it a more complex, mobile battle, where the famous cavalry that would become central to the Arthurian myth, the forerunners of knights, rode down the Saxon infantry on open ground? The true mystery of Badon is not just about finding a place on a map. It is about understanding how a single event, real or magnified, could crystallize into a national legend. This victory, whoever won it, provided a story of hope. It proved the invaders could be stopped. In the long, dark years that followed, as Saxon kingdoms slowly solidified their control, the memory of Badon became a powerful tool. It was the story the Britons told themselves to remember they were once victorious, that their world was not always fading. The battle's long shadow makes the historical truth even harder to grasp, as the need for a hero slowly overwrote the facts. Was there ever a man named Arthur at Badon Hill, or did we simply need there to be one? They were the last great storm from the steppe, a whirlwind of horsemen who seized the heart of Europe and held it for 250 years. The Avars erupted into the Carpathian Basin in the late 6th century, a confederation of nomadic warriors whose arrival was so sudden and violent they sent the Lombards fleeing west into Italy. They established a powerful cognate, a steppe empire on horseback, and from their Central European stronghold, they extorted vast quantities of gold from the Byzantine Empire in Constantinople, terrorizing the Balkans and challenging the Franks. Their ringed fortifications, massive concentric earthworks, enclosed a vast territory and testified to their absolute dominance. Then, in the early 9th century, this formidable power, which had seemed an unshakable fixture of the age, simply imploded. The collapse of the Avar Cognate is as sudden and complete as any in history. In the 890s, the armies of the Frankish king Charlemagne launched a series of crushing campaigns, systematically dismantling the Avar defenses. The final blow is described in the Frankish chronicles with grim satisfaction: the utter destruction of the Avar stronghold known as the Ring, and the capture of a hoard of treasure so immense it had troubled the royal treasury for years. But the mystery is not just their military defeat, it is their utter disappearance from the world. After their fall, the Avars as a distinct people vanish from the historical record. They did not pack up and ride back to the steppes from whence they came. They did not establish a new kingdom elsewhere, they were just gone. This profound vanishing act is made even more baffling by their scant archaeological footprint. For a people who dominated Central Europe for a quarter of a millennium, their material traces are strangely ephemeral. We find their distinctive graves, the skeletons of men buried with their horses and their elegant bronze-trimmed harnesses. We find hints of their wealth in the gold they extracted from Byzantium, but we find almost no Avar cities, no great palaces, no inscriptions telling their own story. Their empire was one of felt tents and mobile courts, leaving little for archaeologists to unearth beyond their graves. How could a people so powerful leave so little behind? This silence leads to one of the most contentious historical puzzles of the region. What was the relationship between the vanished Avars and the Hungarians, a new wave of steppe horsemen who arrived in the exact same Carpathian basin just a few decades after the Avars fell? Were the Hungarians, the Magyars, simply the next conquerors moving into a power vacuum, or was their arrival a homecoming? Some scholars point to linguistic and archaeological clues suggesting that a significant Avar population remained in the land after their cognate collapsed and that the incoming Hungarians absorbed them. In this theory, the Avars did not vanish, they simply changed their name and their leadership, merging with the new arrivals to form the ethnic core of the Hungarian nation. The alternative view is that the Frankish conquest and subsequent Slavic settlement was so thorough that the Avar population was dispersed, assimilated, or wiped out entirely, leaving an empty land for the Hungarians to claim. The truth is likely buried in the soil and in our own DNA. The ghost of the Avar cognate forces us to ask what truly constitutes the end of a people. Is it the fall of their king, the scattering of their army, or the final moment when their language is no longer spoken? For the Avars, that moment passed unrecorded, their empire dissolving like mist over the plains they once ruled. Buried in a farmer's field for over 13 centuries, a king's ransom in war gear lay hidden just beneath the plough line. The Staffordshire hoard, unearthed in 2009, is not a collection of coins or jewelry for adornment. It is a glittering pile of broken warfare, the largest trove of Anglo-Saxon gold and silver ever discovered. Comprising over 3,500 items, almost all of it is military hardware, stripped from the battlefield with ruthless efficiency. We find dozens of ornate sword pommels, finely crafted from gold and garnet, and countless hilt fittings, the precious parts carefully removed from their iron blades which were left to rust away. This was not a personal treasure chest, it was a systematic collection of war loot, the stripped finery of defeated warriors. But who went to the trouble of gathering this incredible wealth, and why did they leave it in the ground, never to return? The hoard was buried along a main Roman road, a strategic and well-traveled route in the Kingdom of Mercia during the 7th century, a time of near-constant warfare between rival Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. This location points to a military context, a world of marching armies and shifting borders. One compelling theory suggests this was a royal treasury, perhaps the war chest of the Mercian king himself, Penda, or one of his successors, buried for safekeeping during a moment of crisis. A lost battle or a sudden invasion could have prompted its concealment, with the king and his retinue killed before they could retrieve their fortune. Yet the nature of the hoard argues against this. Why bury only the decorative parts of swords, not the usable iron blades or the coins needed to pay an army? This selective collection hints at a more ritualistic purpose. Was this a tribute to the gods of war, a vast offering of vanquished enemies' finery, thanking the divine for a victory or pleading for one to come? The act of deliberately breaking the precious objects, of ritually killing the loot, was a known practice in pagan Germanic cultures, a way of taking the power of the defeated out of circulation and dedicating it to the gods. The hoard's burial during the very century when Christianity was struggling to take root in Mercia adds another layer of intrigue. Was this the last grand offering of a dying pagan faith, a desperate attempt to buy the favor of the old gods in the face of a new one? The mystery is compounded by the sheer value of what was left behind. In a world where a single gold pommel could make a man wealthy for life, the abandonment of such a concentration of wealth is staggering. The owner intended to come back, but something prevented it. The secret of the Staffordshire hoard is not just in its glittering beauty, but in the violent urgency of its burial, a single, decisive act in a forgotten war, whose story is told only by the loot that was never reclaimed. A name echoes in the annals of Rome, attached to a people who then dissolve into silence. The Bastarnae were a constant, shadowy presence on the lower Danube frontier, a tribe known to Greek historians and Roman generals for centuries. They fought alongside King Philip V of Macedon and later clashed with Roman legions, yet for all their mentions in the chronicles, they remain one of the most linguistically ghostly peoples of the era. The core of their mystery is not what they did, but who they were. Were they a Germanic tribe related to the later Goths who traversed the same lands? Their name and the names of their kings recorded by the Romans sound distinctly Germanic to many scholars, yet other evidence complicates this simple classification. The geography of their homeland, in the wooded region between the Carpathian Mountains and the Black Sea, was also the domain of Celtic tribes, and some archaeological finds from their territory show strong Celtic influences in weaponry and art. Could they have been a Celtic people who adopted Germanic customs, or perhaps a powerful fusion of both, a hybrid culture born on the frontier? This question of their language is a doorway into a deeper puzzle. If they were Germanic, their story becomes a tragic prelude, a branch of the family tree that was pruned away before the great migrations began in earnest. If they were Celtic, they represent a last, fading echo of the Latin culture that once dominated Europe, holding out in the east while their western cousins were absorbed by Rome. The most intriguing possibility is that they were neither, but a unique people with their own tongue, a language now lost forever, who were simply grouped under the convenient labels of Greco-Roman geography. Their fate is as obscure as their origins. They did not vanish in a dramatic, recorded catastrophe. Instead, they simply faded, their distinct identity slowly eroded by the very forces that defined their existence. Living on the volatile frontier, they were buffeted by the rising power of Dacia to the north and the constant pressure from Rome to the south. When the Gothic peoples began their great movement into the region, the Bastarnae were likely absorbed, their warriors joining the new confederations, their language giving way to Gothic, their name no longer needed. They became a people without a border, their unique voice swallowed by the chorus of larger tribes. Why does a single, lost language matter? Because the Bastarnae represent the countless smaller peoples whose stories were not grand enough to be remembered. They are a reminder that the Great Migrations were not just the movement of a few famous tribes, but a vast, chaotic reshuffling of humanity, in which many unique cultures and tongues were extinguished forever, leaving behind only a name in an old book and a question we can no longer answer. Their names are whispered with a tragic reverence, men branded as the last of the Romans, Flavius Aetius, the general who turned back Attila at the Catalonian plains. Emperor Majorian, who launched a desperate, brilliant campaign to reclaim the lost provinces of Gaul and Spain, and Syagrius, the ruler of that final Roman island in Gaul. Each was hailed in their time as the final, best hope, a figure of immense talent and determination who seemed capable of reversing the tide. Yet each one failed, and their collective failure presents a haunting puzzle. If they were so capable, if they were the last and greatest of their kind, why could they not save the world they fought for? The mystery is not in their individual defeats, but in the pattern they formed together. The title Last of the Romans is more than a compliment. It is a diagnosis of a terminal illness. It signifies a man who possessed all the traditional Roman virtues, duty, military genius, administrative skill, but who was ultimately operating within a system that was already dead. Aetius was a brilliant general, but his power depended on a fragile alliance of barbarian foederati, and he was eventually murdered by his own paranoid emperor. Majorian was a reformer of immense energy, passing laws to rebuild the crumbling cities and restore the tax base, but his very success frightened the powerful, corrupt senatorial elite who conspired with the Vandal king to have him deposed and executed. Syagrius held his domain together with Roman law and discipline, but he stood alone, a single candle in a hurricane, snuffed out by the rising power of Clovis. They were not defeated by a lack of personal ability, but by a world that could no longer support their kind of greatness. The very state they were trying to save had become a hollow shell. The tax revenue had dried up, the armies were now private war bands loyal to their Germanic commanders, and the civilian aristocracy had lost its nerve, preferring to cut deals with new barbarian masters rather than rally behind a failing cause. These last Romans were like master mechanics trying to repair an engine that was not just broken, but had run out of fuel. They were fighting the symptoms of the collapse, not the cause. The deeper enigma is whether their ultimate failure was inevitable. Was the Western Roman Empire by the 5th century simply beyond saving, or were they doomed by a specific fatal flaw that each of them shared? Perhaps their greatest weakness was their very Roman-ness. They were trying to restore a centralized imperial system in a world that was rapidly localizing, where power was devolving to the level of the city, the diocese, and the individual warlord. They were trying to command an ocean with a single oar. The title Last of the Romans, then, is a paradox. It honors the man, but it mourns the death of the idea he represented. These figures were not the cause of the fall, but its final, magnificent symptoms. Their stories force us to ask a difficult question. Can a single great leader, no matter how brilliant, ever save a civilization whose own people have stopped believing in it? 30 years of unraveling these enigmas leads us to one final, towering question, the ultimate cause of the Great Migration itself. What single force could set entire continents in motion, shattering an empire that had stood for a millennium? The answer is not one mystery, but a complex knot of 5 competing theories, each a powerful explanation in its own right. The first points to a changing sky. A period of global cooling starting around the 5th century may have shortened growing seasons and forced northern tribes from their homelands. Imagine the slow, creeping dread as harvests failed year after year, the deep cold pushing people southward in a desperate search for warmer lands. This climatic pressure would have been a silent, inexorable engine driving the first dominoes to fall. The second theory places the blame squarely on a single, terrifying catalyst, the Huns. Their explosive arrival from the steppes acted like a hammer blow, shattering the delicate balance of tribes along the Roman frontier and setting off a chain reaction. The Goths, the Vandals, the Lombards, each were like billiard balls struck by the Hunnic cue, sent careening into the empire. But were the Huns a fundamental cause, or merely the spark that lit a fuse that was already laid? This brings us to the third idea, overpopulation. Some scholars argue that a population boom among the Germanic tribes north of the Rhine and Danube created an unsustainable pressure, a human tide that had to spill over the imperial borders. The land could simply no longer support the people living on it, making migration not a choice but a necessity for survival. Yet, the direction of this movement is the fourth crucial piece of the puzzle, the pull of a weakening Rome. The empire in the 4th and 5th centuries was not the impregnable fortress it once was. It was rich, politically fractured, and its armies were a shadow of their former selves. To the tribes outside, it must have looked like a magnificent, overripe fruit ready to fall. The allure of its wealth, its fertile land, and its vulnerable cities created a powerful gravitational pull, drawing in ambitious warriors and desperate families alike. Finally, we must consider the internal dynamics of the tribes themselves. The rise of a charismatic young war leader could unite fractious clans and channel their energies outward toward conquest. The pursuit of personal glory, the search for new lands for a rising royal dynasty, or simply the warrior culture's need for plunder and fame could have provided the final, decisive impetus for people to pull up their roots and march. So which of these forces was primary? The truth is that no single theory can bear the full weight of this epoch. It was the catastrophic convergence of all five. A cooling climate may have pushed tribes toward the frontier just as the Huns arrived to shatter them, sending them reeling into a wealthy but politically crippled empire that was too weak to resist the human tide, a tide driven by its own internal ambitions. The Great Migration was not a single event with a single cause. It was a perfect storm, a historical avalanche where climate, coincidence, and human ambition collided to bring down a world and birth a new one from its ruins. 30 profound mysteries stand between us and a clear understanding of this chaotic age, a detective story written not in ink, but in the silent gaps between one civilization's end and another's beginning. From the ghost of a vanished legion to a king's treasure lost beneath a river, from a global winter with no name to the silent stones of a forgotten language, each puzzle is a piece of a continent-wide mosaic we are still struggling to assemble. These are not just academic curiosities, they are the very threads that, if pulled, could unravel the entire narrative of how the modern world was born. They remind us with every unanswered question that history is not a settled record of facts in a book. It is a living, breathing inquiry, a conversation across the centuries where every new discovery, every scrap of evidence pulled from a bog or a farmer's field, can rewrite everything we thought we knew. The empty spaces on the map, the chronicles that end mid-sentence, the peoples who vanished without a trace, they all speak to the same profound truth. The past is not dead and buried, it is merely waiting for us to ask the right questions, so we turn this final page over to you. After this journey through fire and movement, through kingdoms that rose and fell in a lifetime, which of these 30 mysteries captures your imagination most completely? Was it the whispered name of Arthur, the glittering horde of Alaric, or the silent departure of the 9th Legion that left you wondering? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you are eager for more journeys into the forgotten corners of our past, be sure to subscribe. The story is far